It's funny, isn't it? How we dismiss the old stories. Those whispers of things that stalk the gloaming. The tales meant to keep kids from wandering off when the sun dips low. I used to be one of those people. Smug, superior, dead certain that science and reason had chased all the monsters away. Then I spent a week in Oakhaven, and what I saw, what I felt, well, let's just say some myths have teeth. And they're very, very real. My name's Alex. And for most of my life, let's just say I was a proud rationalist, a skeptic through and through. Ghosts, cryptids, ancient curses, I'd file them all under charming local color, or to be blunt, total nonsense. So, when my work as a freelance journalist took me to Oakhaven, this remote village tucked away in a valley, shadowed by ancient, gnarled forests, I was honestly more interested in its crumbling buildings and quiet life than any unique local legends. Oakhaven was the kind of place where time seemed to just pool and stagnate. The folks there were polite, but reserved. Their conversations often had these veiled warnings about the gloaming hour, that weird, in-between time from dusk to true night. They'd talk about the shade of the wood, a creature, they said, that hunted in the fading light, something that had been part of their valley for generations. Their descriptions were always hazy, wrapped up in euphemisms and a whole lot of fear. A whisper in the trees, a cold spot that moved, eyes that didn't reflect any light. They said it was drawn to people who disrespected the old ways, those who walked too boldly when the veil between worlds was thin. To me, their stories were just that, cautionary tales, maybe ways to explain away the isolation of the valley. Of course, I scoffed. Internally, anyway. I'd scribble in my journal about their quaint superstitions, this charming adherence to ancestral fears. The shade of the wood, I figured, was probably just a misidentified bear, or maybe a collective way for them to cope with the loneliness and the deep, often unsettling quiet of the place. The elders would just shake their heads when they saw me prepping my camera gear for late afternoon hikes, their eyes clouded with this concern I found almost patronizing. "The forest keeps its own counsel after sundown, young man," one old woman told me, her voice as raspy as dry leaves. Best not to eavesdrop. Their folklore had specific no-goes. Avoid the old mill road as twilight deepened, never whistle near the Whispering Falls after the last light. And above all, be indoors before the final sliver of sun vanished behind Blackwood Ridge. These weren't just friendly suggestions. They were delivered with a seriousness that was almost dreadful. I jotted down these rules with a kind of detached amusement, already planning an article on rural superstitions. I had absolutely no idea I was about to become its central, horrified subject. My big mistake, my real act of arrogance, came on the fourth day. I'd been trying to get this perfect sunset shot over Blackwood Ridge, and the light was just incredible. The sky was bleeding crimson and violet, the air was perfectly still, and the forest seemed to be holding its breath. I knew the locals would be scurrying indoors, but the photographer in me, the skeptic in me, kept pushing me on. Just a few more minutes, I told myself. What's the worst that can happen? A little dew on my boots? I pushed further up this old, disused logging trail, deeper than I'd gone before at this hour. The warnings about the gloaming hour, about the shade, echoed faintly in my mind, but I brushed them off. Products of generations of living in a bubble, I thought. I figured it was just the human mind doing its thing, making up explanations for what it doesn't understand, especially in a place this cut off from everything. I was there for truth, for tangible reality, not for shadows conjured by fear. I set up my tripod, framing that last, fiery kiss of the sun. That's when the temperature plummeted. Not gradually, like it does when evening settles in, but all at once, like a cold front had just slammed into the mountainside, right where I was standing. The vibrant colors of the sunset seemed to just dull, the air growing heavy, almost suffocating. An unnatural silence fell, the kind that presses in on your eardrums. No birdsong, no rustle of animals in the underbrush, not even the buzz of insects. It was as if the whole forest had just decided to stop existing. I remember a shiver, and not entirely from the cold, tracing a path down my spine. I told myself it was the altitude, the sudden change in light playing tricks on me. I started packing up my camera, a sudden weird urgency gripping me. The light was fading fast now, the world dissolving into shades of gray and deep indigo. As I started back down the trail, I heard it, a soft thump. Like something heavy but padded, landing on the forest floor just out of sight. I stopped, called out a shaky, "Hello?" Only the echo of my own voice answered, and it sounded small, kind of foolish. I picked up my pace. The path seemed longer than it had on the way up, the familiar turns now feeling strangely sinister. Then came the crack of a twig, much closer this time, just beyond the tree line to my right. I spun around, my heart hammering. Nothing. Just the dense, darkening woods. But I couldn't shake this distinct, prickling feeling of being watched. Studied, even. You know that primal feeling? The one that just bypasses all rational thought. My skepticism was still there, a stubborn knot in my gut. But it was definitely being frayed at the edges by this growing, undeniable dread. Further down, where the trail narrowed and the trees pressed in like silent sentinels, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Scratched into the damp earth, clear as day, were 3 deep gouges, each at least a foot long and ending in what looked like claw marks. They hadn't been there on my way up. I knew, I absolutely knew, they hadn't. They were too fresh. The displaced soil was still dark and moist. No bear I'd ever read about left marks like that. So deliberate, so placed. My breath hitched. This wasn't any animal I recognized. My mind raced, trying to cook up a logical explanation. A prank by local kids? Unlikely, out here, this late. Some kind of weird geological fissure? That was just absurd. The silence returned, thicker this time, charged with an unseen presence. I fumbled for my powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a path through the gloom. But the shadows beyond its reach seemed to deepen, to almost writhe. A low sound, almost a guttural sigh, vibrated through the air from somewhere ahead, near a dense clump of ancient oaks the locals called the elderwood. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. It was expectant. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the spot. The rational part of my brain was losing its battle with a much older, much more visceral fear. The stories of the shade, the warnings, the specific mention of twilight, they all crashed into my mind, no longer quaint, but terrifyingly immediate. I started to back away slowly, my eyes darting into the impenetrable darkness of the elderwood. Then, a flicker of movement. Not a deer, not a fox, something taller. Something that seemed to absorb the faint leftover light rather than reflect it. It was just a glimpse, a silhouette against the even deeper black of the trees. But it was enough. My skepticism didn't just fray, it snapped. I didn't wait for a second look. I turned and bolted. Any shred of bravery, any attempt at rational thought, gone. Replaced by raw, mindless panic. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I heard it again. That soft, heavy thump, closer now, and faster. It was keeping pace. It wasn't running. It was loping, with an unnatural, terrifying rhythm. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. In the fleeting, fragmented light from my wildly swinging flashlight, I saw a towering figure, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, gaunt and impossibly thin, yet it just radiated immense power. Its limbs were long, jointed at odd angles, moving with this horrifying fluidity. Its color was the deep, flat black of a starless night, a void in the shape of a creature. I couldn't make out a distinct face, not in the usual sense. There was just a suggestion of a head, and where eyes should have been, there were 2 points of deeper darkness, like holes punched into the night itself, that seemed to drink the light. I felt a coldness radiate from them, a profound, soul-chilling emptiness. It made no sound as it moved, except for that rhythmic impact of its feet on the earth. Each step precise, unhurried, yet it was gaining on me. Terror, stark and absolute, flooded my system. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I pushed on, driven by this primal need to escape this impossible reality. It was toying with me. I knew it. It could have caught me in seconds, but it wasn't. It was hurting me, maybe, or just enjoying the chase. The folklore said it haunted the twilight. It was a being of that in-between space, and I had trespassed. I burst out of the denser woods onto the slightly more open mill road, the one the locals warned against. The old, dilapidated mill stood silhouetted against the last scraps of twilight, a monument to decay. And the creature was there. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead, standing silently by the roadside, as if it had simply willed itself there. It hadn't run past me. It had appeared. I skidded to a halt, my mind reeling. Trapped. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that was utterly alien. And then, from the void where its mouth should have been, came a sound. Not a roar, not a scream. It was a whisper, but a whisper that seemed to fill the entire valley, a sound like 1,000 dry leaves skittering over ancient stones, like the cracking of ice in the deepest winter. It was a sound that promised oblivion. I felt my sanity fraying, the edges of my reality crumbling. This wasn't just an animal. It was an intelligence, ancient and terrifyingly malevolent. I don't know what happened next. I think I screamed. I must have. The next thing I remember with any clarity is an overwhelming, blinding light and the roar of an engine. Headlights. A truck. It came rattling around the bend, its high beams momentarily catching the shade full on. The creature reacted. It didn't flinch in a natural way. It seemed to recoil from the light, not like it was in pain, but more like the light itself was just wrong for it, against its very being. It didn't run. It simply dissolved, like smoke, or a shadow stretching and then vanishing as the light source moves. One moment it was there, a solid block of terror. The next, only the empty road and the whispering trees. The truck screeched to a halt beside me. An old farmer, one I recognized from the village, leaned out, his face pale and grim. He didn't ask what I was doing there. He didn't ask what I'd seen. He just said, his voice tight, "Get in, boy." The gloaming's no time for being out. I scrambled into the cab, shaking so violently I could barely work the door handle. I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger back towards where the shade had stood. He nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "Aye," he said, his voice barely audible above the engine's rumble. "It knows you now." The drive back to my rented cottage was a blur. The farmer didn't press me for details, and I offered none. What could I say? How could I even begin to describe the sheer reality-bending horror of what I'd witnessed? My scientific worldview, my carefully constructed skepticism, lay in shattered ruins around me. Going from staunch skeptic to, well, whatever I was now. It's a shock to the system, to say the least. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Every shadow in my room seemed to writhe with unseen limbs. Every gust of wind carried that sibilant whisper. The moment I could, I packed my bags, my hands still shaking, and left Oakhaven. I didn't finish my article on quaint superstitions. How could I? It's been months since that night. That encounter. It changed me. Deep down. I no longer scoff at old tales. I listen to the whispers of folklore with a new, chilling respect. I get it now. Those old stories, the ones we usually brush off, they're passed down for a reason. Sometimes they're warnings, born from things people saw that they just couldn't explain. The world is so much older, so much stranger, and so much more dangerous than my narrow, rational mind had ever allowed me to believe. They said it was just folklore. They said the shadows held nothing but what we project onto them. They were wrong. I saw what I saw, In the fading light of Oakhaven, where the veil between worlds grows thin, I met something ancient and real, and it saw me. Some myths, I now know, aren't just stories. Some myths are waiting in the twilight, and some myths are deadly true. If you've had an encounter you can't explain, something that shattered your idea of what's real, share your story in the comments below. I, for one, am listening now. And if you want to hear more about the truths that hide in the shadows, make sure to subscribe. You never know what else might be out there.